My title is interesting in enough of itself, like having a title that says how oysters and river rocks saved my life. But before I get to that, I need to tell you a little bit about how I got here. And so I was born in Queens, New York. I was born at a hospital called St. John's. And on the night that I was born, I was the only baby born in that hospital that night. And that's interesting in and of itself. But the most interesting part of that story is that I was the only baby boy born in that hospital for the last 5 months. 5 months. No boys. Yo, that's crazy, right? And so the nurses were giddy. They put money together. They bought my mother this gold cross to give to me when I got older. And I still have this gold cross. But what they said to my mom, I've been hearing this story since about age 6. They said, Joyce, we're not sure what he's going to be or do when he grows up, but whatever it is, it will be different. I've been hearing that story since I was 6. Do you know how that made me feel as a young kid growing up? That's right. Like a freak. Now, I know we brag about differences, right? Hey, be unique, be yourself. There's only one you. I was actually at a funeral of one of my friends several years ago, and one of a mutual friend got up and he was speaking, and he said about my friend who had passed away, he said, all Chris ever wanted people to be and to know was that they are amazing gurus. And I was like, Chris never said that. And the speaker, anticipating that we'd all have that reaction, he said, I want everyone right now, out loud, spell the word guru. And we're all like, okay. And we're like, G, U, R, U. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Okay. So I've heard all that stuff about being unique. And I got to tell you something about being unique when you discover, when you are younger, that you are different. It doesn't work out always as well. When I discovered that I was different growing up, you know what difference meant when you're growing up? It meant that I was afforded the wonderful opportunity to play at recess by myself in elementary school. It meant in middle school that I was given the privilege of eating lunch alone in the cafeteria. And it meant in high school, I was the guy you would not invite to your party when your parents went out of town. I was too different. And I'll be honest, I hated being different. I didn't realize it was my power. I wanted to be just like other people. I wanted my friends to like me, to be like the person that everyone wanted to be around, but I was not that. And it caused a lot of suffering growing up. And I was going through a lot of pain and that sadness and all that depression. So jump ahead, years later, I'm playing this game called Mind Trap. It's actually sitting on the shelf behind me. And it's a trivia type of game. And it also has these questions to see how smart you are. And there was this statement on one of the cards that said, this creature has the potential to be sometimes more valuable after it is injured. And I was like, I think my answer at the time was elephant. But the answer is the oyster. Why? Because oysters make pearls. So many of us know that already. Oysters make pearls. But to be honest with you, I didn't know much more than that little fact. Oysters make pearls. How does the oyster make pearls? Well, you know the story for some of you, the grain of sand. We're taught the grain of sand is the most important ingredient for the oyster to make a pearl. That's not quite accurate. Yes, the grain of sand can play a role, irritates the oyster. Somehow, some process, I didn't really understand it, but the oyster turns that grain of sand or that irritant into a pearl, and then voila, it's more valuable. But that is not really the story. First of all, the grain of sand is not the most important ingredient. The most important ingredient, because oysters have had grains of sand inside their shell, and they never created pearls. Why? Because they did not experience enough pain. Pain is the most important ingredient. That unless the oyster crosses over a certain threshold of pain, it won't release the chemical that turns that grain of sand into a pearl. And the story isn't over because the oyster creates a pearl, but some of you have fell for that trap, right? You got into the right school, you got the right job, you make the right income, you marry the right person, and you think, yes, I did it. That's not really how the story goes. At the end of the day, the oyster cannot keep its own pearl if it wants to increase its value. But I was never taught that. I was taught, like some of you, about the oyster story. I remember hearing the first time about the oyster at being at some youth retreat, and the minister was like, young men and young women, you are like the oysters. And his teenagers are like, ew, you're like the oyster that gets the grain of sand inside of its shell, and then it turns it into a pearl. You should do that with your lives. And I was always like, I didn't realize that the power of the story is in that final piece when somebody else finds it. I didn't realize that my pain, my sadness was all about, it was at that time all about me getting through it, but that's not the magic in it. I wish I understood the story of the oyster in elementary school, on the playground, in middle school, in the cafeteria, and in high school, sitting alone in my room and just wondering, how come I wasn't invited? I wish I understood the story of the oyster, that it couldn't be hidden in the successes of academia, of me being in college and having a 3.83 grade point average and making my parents very proud because they're immigrants and they worked really hard. They came to America, gave me better opportunities than they had in Jamaica. I wish I understood it. 3 weeks before graduation, I was feeling great in college. I had a 3.83 grade point average. I graduated with high honors, magna cum laude, and I was selected to be the baccalaureate speaker of my graduation class. I wish I understood the story of the oyster. When 3 weeks before graduation, I'm sitting in a counseling class and my professor has written a bunch of stuff on a blackboard behind her, which gives away a little bit how old I am. And she wrote these words and phrases on the blackboard. And then she turns to the class and she says, class, I want you to pay attention today. This is going to be a very sensitive topic. I want you to take a look at everything that I've written on the board, because these are warning signs. If any of your clients or your patients enter into your office and they present with any of these words or phrases, you really have to pay attention, because these are indicators of trauma. Caught my attention. I started paying attention. I started looking at all the things that were written on the board, and then I started laughing, because indicators of trauma are not as obvious as some of you may think. I mean, I was looking for the person that beats up other people, the person that has been in and out of detention centers, the person who self-harms. I understood those ones. I didn't understand the things that she had written on the board, things like setting fires. I was like, setting fires? How is that trauma? I'm a pyro. I love setting fires. Lying and manipulative behaviors. I was like, don't knock lying and manipulative behaviors. That helped me survive my home growing up so I wouldn't get beaten by a belt from my father. Torturing small animals.
Sorry, little froggy.
Being touched inappropriately or in a way that made you feel uncomfortable. And it had the slashes. And the third word was molestation. And I looked at it and I started laughing again. And I was like, my professor really has no clue what she's talking about. That's not molestation. If that's molestation, that's exactly what one of my friends did to me when I was 11. And I had this word for this experience that happened when I was 11 years old by my friend Dan, who was 16. And some of you understand when you discover this word that everyone already knows this is not a good word. But what it meant for a kid like me growing up, it meant you are more damaged than you already thought. And that afternoon, I go into my dorm room And then the attack starts to happen. I'm really good at beating myself up. And I know some of you are as well. Some of you are the hardest person on you. Nobody can beat how difficult you are on yourself. That's me. I'm walking around my dorm room. I'm like, you're stupid. You're so ugly. Who cares about 3.8? I hate you. It was your fault. And I felt so suicidal. I wanted to give up. But something was holding on inside of me that was saying, you got to stay. And I picked up the phone. I called my mom. And I know we go to our parents first. And sometimes it's great. We go to our parents and they bring us the words that help us to heal. But sometimes they bring us the words that make us feel worse. My mom brought me the words that made me feel worse. I call my mom and she says these words and I feel really upset. And I hang up the phone on my mom. But I didn't give up. And that's the part I pass on to you. You see, I didn't know in that dorm room about the story of the oyster. But I knew that I had to figure out how to stay. And I picked that phone back up and I called this man named Charlie Thiel, who's a good friend of mine today. But he was a youth pastor at the time. And I was crying and I was upset and I was suicidal. And I was like, Charlie, when I was 11, there was this kid named Dan who was 16. And for 2 years, he molested me. And I just figured it out in class today. And right now, I feel so sad. And right now, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm in so much pain. And I just don't want to feel sad. And Charlie said, Mike, I love you. And like a good youth pastor, he goes, Mike, God loves you. It was not your fault. And you're not going to understand what I'm going to tell you next, Michael, but you have to listen to me. You're going to heal from this pain. And after you heal, you will need to talk about it again. Because there are so many other people in this world who need to heal. I did not know about the story of the oyster and that grain of sand turning into a pearl. And then somebody else taking that pearl for themselves. But I started understanding a little bit. After Charlie said that, I felt like living. I started healing. I went on to graduate school. I was doing well in graduate school. I started speaking in schools all around the country. And then when I graduated graduate school, I started speaking outside of the country. But I didn't get the last part about the pearl coming from sand until 5 years ago. I'm standing in this middle school doing my presentation. And at the end of my presentation, this 8th grade girl, she starts crying and everyone is frozen staring at her. And she gets up from her seat. I think she's about to run out of an auditorium, but instead she comes running over to me. And as she gets closer, I can see it all. I can see the mascara. I can see the tears. I can see the snots all racing down to the chin. And when she gets to me, she just grabs me and she just hugs me with dear life for about a minute. And then she steps back. And then I understood what the pearl is for. She said, thank you. Thank you for not killing yourself when you were in college. Because today, you just saved my life. At 22 years old, I couldn't see that. I couldn't see that my pain, that grain of sand, that I was turning into a pearl, was not meant for me. It was meant for her. And I had to get it out. So I've been fascinated with whether sand or solid rocks. Because solid rock is just a bunch of sand that got together and through water and time, it turned into that rock. And so I started thinking about that. And so sand is a really important thing to me, and same with river rocks. This past spring, I had my landscapers put down a bunch of river rocks outside of my home in this flower bed because I'm too lazy to plant flowers or vegetables. And I was happy that I didn't have to do anything. And I'd gone out before they completed the job. When I came back home, my girlfriend happened to be at my house and she said, oh, they were waiting for you, but they just wanted to remind you to water your rocks every other day. And I was like, water my rocks? And she said, well, they're river rocks. They need water. And so I took the direction. I started watering the rocks. About 2 weeks of watering the rocks, I come back inside. I pick up the phone. I call my girlfriend and I'm like, baby, I feel so dumb watering these rocks. And she asks, why were you even watering the rocks in the first place? And I said, well, that's what you told me. The landscapers told you. And she just is like, I was just joking. Yes, she pulled off a great prank. But I got to tell you, I've been still watering my rocks. Not every other day. But I love watering the rocks. And I'm going to tell you why I love watering the rocks. Because when I go out, river rocks, they look great against my house, but they're dull when they're dry. When I water them, they glisten. They shine. Hues that you cannot see when they are dry start to come forth. The best part of the rocks are saved when I put water on them. Something that I do is making those rocks show their best. When I speak on stage, when I speak like this, when I'm interacting with people, when I'm sitting in a bar, when I'm at an airport and I'm having conversations with people, I know that my words will not last a lifetime. I know that my words in those moments may be forgotten a day later, a week later, but I hope in that moment that I say something that makes somebody think, feel, laugh, cry, but I say something that helps another individual to shine with their better selves. That's what I try to do. I think about those moments of me wanting to give up, and I am reminded by having English teachers, youth pastors, other people in my life who have intercepted my path to let me know that I am not alone. And had they not intercepted my path in the time they did, I would not be able to heal and turn my pain into those pearls and help others to be able to shine. You are not alone. I am not alone. We are more powerful than our pain. I take postcards and I write things like that. And then I go to Barnes and Noble and I stick them into books in hopes that somebody who's hurting can find these words to continue to live. I am here because I decided to take those pearls and then to allow others to benefit from them.